By 2032, ACT will empower 20.2 million more learners to exit high school ready for post-secondary and work opportunities. We will concentrate our work around 5 strategic pillars: build, inform, connect, mobilize, and partner. We are collaborating with key stakeholders to bring this bold new vision to life. We've got our work cut out for us, and with your support moving forward, we will make it happen.
I'll just welcome everybody to the first session in the higher education track of the Gazette's Iowa Ideas Conference. I'll be your moderator today. I'm Vanessa Miller. I've been covering higher education for the Gazette for a decade, and I've been with the Gazette for 12 years. Just want to start by telling everybody that this session on small college health is going to be recorded, as all of them are, and it also has closed captioning availability. I'll also thank our sponsors, which include ITC Midwest and ACT. And yeah, I was going to give just each of our 3 panelists a few minutes to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about their connection to this topic. I also just wanted to let everybody know that if you have questions throughout the session as they come to you, go ahead and send those to our moderator, and she will send those to me, and then I can ask them in real time just to make sure that they feel relevant to everybody and that you don't forget them. So yeah, let's just get started. Fletcher Lemkin, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Fletch Lampkin. I'm a retired Army officer, and for the last 23 years, I've been involved in higher education, mostly as a college president. This is my 5th presidency here at Clark University. I was appointed here as an interim about 9 months ago, and I've had experience at small private colleges, small public colleges, and at maybe medium-sized public institutions. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, President Brand.
So hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Brand. I am the president of Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. I'm in my 13th year at Cornell. My entire professional life has been pretty much focused on residential liberal arts colleges. And so you can see how this topic would be front and center for me, and one that I'm obviously invested in and very interested in.
Yeah, and go ahead, Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Moody. I cover business, finance, and leadership at Inside Higher Ed. As the name implies, we cover higher ed exclusively. I have been covering higher ed for a decade now and got my start right nearby in Nebraska. And these days I find myself writing a lot about the challenges of the business of higher education and how colleges are or aren't solving those issues.
Yeah, well, thanks again for being here and for everybody being here. I wanted to start with sort of a general question just to kind of lay the landscape. Like, what is the state of small colleges today? Like, we have read a lot, obviously, about challenges that they're facing. There have been closures in the news. But the same goes for all universities and colleges facing different issues. So I guess what is sort of like the unique landscape of this sect of higher education?
So, I mean, I'll jump in and just say, I think it is every bit as stressed as the media makes it out to be. I mean, I would argue that it's sort of self-fulfilling. The media is a part of the challenge that we have to confront. But I really think that the residential liberal arts college is in the bullseye right now. And we talk a lot about the demographic cliff. It actually hasn't even started yet.
Right. Yeah, I thought it was supposed to arrive in 2025 or 2026.
And that's accurate. I think COVID has sort of accelerated the decline. And it's interesting. So Fletch, I'll just say I'm looking a lot at Josh now because, Josh, you have the national landscape in a way. Fletch and I are very much Iowa focused. I mean, our students come from schools, from states far and wide across the country and internationally. But the national landscape, I think, is every bit as precarious, and maybe even worse than people are aware, because nobody wants to scream uncle.
If I could jump in on that, from my vantage point, it seems like the gulf between the haves and the have-nots of higher education is growing. In-demand colleges, those with major brand names, seem to have their pick of students, while others are struggling to recover from a national post-COVID-19 enrollment hangover. And, this is happening against the backdrop of inflation, wage pressures, as colleges struggle to meet employees' needs. And both Fitch Ratings and Moody's Investor Services have predicted more college closures, mergers, and reorganizations in the coming years. And I think there's something to that, given how much I find myself writing about those issues practically every week.
Yeah. And Josh, if I can just add, what we're seeing by the haves getting stronger more quickly and the have-nots getting weaker more quickly, that's exactly what Nathan Graw predicted in his the demographics of higher education. I can't remember the precise name. It's exactly what he predicted.
Yeah, he was the one that did the enrollment cliff prediction specifically, correct?
He did, and that was based on birth rates in 2008. Now, of course, we have birth rates through 2022, and we know that this decline, there's a slight uptick, I think, in 2032, 2033, and then it declines again. So, I mean, this is here for a while, this decline.
I would agree. And that enrollment cliff, though, is not that great in the Midwest. I think it's like 1% through 25. But it's the haves, particularly at the East and West Coast of the large cities, are going to be recruiting in our area, looking for additional students to try to fill their institutions. So it means that the enrollment competition is going to only get greater and more difficult. And it's up to those of us who are running small private colleges to balance our budgets and to make sure that we have enough new students coming in that we're able to create a viable institution. But even more important than having the new students is retaining the ones who come to you, because 2/3 of your revenue for the next year is from or your tuition and fees revenue comes from your returning students. And if you're losing students, particularly in that first year, it's going to put a big strain on your budget and make it and put you in a bad way. So we need to operate extremely efficiently. We need to have strong enrollment management going on, and we need to have every program at the college geared toward student success so that we can retain at least 80% of those first year students and keep them there to graduate successfully. It's the financial realities of running a small private college these days are let me just say it's a lot more difficult than it used to be. And you've got to be extremely efficient. You've got to be very careful to see where waste may be occurring in your organization. We can get into that if we want to later. But we also really need to see are we really taking care of our students? And if we're not, let's figure out a way to do a better job so that we can retain more of them and have a greater persistence and success in that student body.
Yeah, well, and that was one thing I was going to ask, and you kind of mentioned this, President Lampkin, but like having been around a bit longer, is this a unique time? Have you seen like the small private college industry be in this specific position before, or is this unique in some way?
I think the uniqueness of it is the population of students who are now in our colleges, our small private colleges. It used to be that the wherewithal of those students and their families was quite a bit greater. At least it seems, and in fact, I know it was. And so the financial strain on families and students was not as severe as it is today. Nowadays, cost is an extremely important factor, and we need to really work with our students, because a great number of them on Pell Grants, a great number of them are first generation students who have to navigate a minefield that they haven't been in before, and neither have their parents. And so we have to provide a lot more support to these students than we did even 20 years ago. So, and guess what? That costs money, because you need people and you need programs to do it. But if you don't do it, then you're going to lose a whole lot of students. So all I can say is it's tougher. It's a lot tougher now than it was just 20 years ago.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Josh, if there are differences regionally. Is that, I had read that maybe California and Texas, some of those spots aren't facing the same sort of threats as like the Midwest and the East Coast. I mean, what are the differences there?
Yeah, that is correct. Colleges are feeling an enrollment squeeze pretty broadly, but there are a few states where the demographics are not as challenging. You mentioned Texas and California. Those are two, but the Midwest and the Northeast have been particularly squeezed. If you look at the Northeast, you have a lot of private liberal arts colleges, small colleges, competing for the same really small batch of students, and something eventually has to give. And that's why you see of recent college closures, a lot have been concentrated in that area. So yeah, the something has to give, and it's starting to. I think Fletcher is spot on with his analysis that colleges are going to come into your backyard even if you're not having the same demographic issues, and try to poach those students because everyone is looking to fill those classes.
Yeah, right. And I guess I'm wondering, we are seeing obviously some closures among small colleges. What impact, if any, does that have on other small colleges or on the communities around the state? I mean, President Brand, Iowa Wesleyan just closed unexpectedly. I mean, did that have any fallout, or did that mean anything for Cornell?
I'd like to address that. I don't know the specifics of their numbers, but I do know the specifics of our numbers. And we contribute on the order of $50 million of revenue to the city of Des Moines each year through various sources that come from the existence of the college. And that does not count the impact of the student population that comes in. And I would imagine that that the closure of Iowa Wesleyan is going to have a significant impact on the city and the region that it supports. And I will say this: I've been at colleges that were on the brink of closing, and I think it's a whole lot more difficult to close the college than it is to sustain it, to take the steps that you need to sustain it. But there comes a time when you've got to make a decision as to whether you're viable, and unfortunately, it's not your value to the community. It's not your provision of opportunity to the students. It's whether or not you can balance your budget that determines whether or not you can survive. And balancing that budget is, the big part of your revenue has to come from tuition and fees and auxiliary enterprises. But once you get beyond that, you can't depend on donors propping you up year to year. You have to show that you're, if not profitable, at least close to it, that you're a sustainable institution. And that requires exquisitely precise management of the institution in all aspects. And in that regard, going back to your initial point, it's a lot tougher now than it used to be. A lot tougher.
Yeah.
And Vanessa, I would say when Iowa Wesleyan closed, one, I don't know the details, but I think Iowa Wesleyan was sort of proverbially on the ropes for quite some time.
Mhm.
I'm of the view that when you have two coffee shops in town, the goal isn't for one to run the other out. The goal is to produce more coffee drinkers. So I think it just sort of raises the question about higher ed in general in a sort of immediate way.
Mhm.
Uh, it's a very different school, was a very different school than Cornell College, but it does, our faculty and staff in particular, all of us, the board, we all take notice. I mean, it
Mhm.
shows that it can happen. It does happen. We're one of four Methodist schools in the state. Iowa Wesleyan is one of the other four, and I think
Mhm.
it also sort of had a little bit of a hit to the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know that so many privates were at the fairs for the students who were losing their Wesleyan home when the closure was happening. Do you
Yep.
know, I mean, did many come to each of your campuses, if in terms of enrolling?
Not my campus. We may have had a few, but it did not have a significant impact on
Mm-hmm.
us. Um,
yeah,
I think that certainly there were staff and faculty members who were hired by other institutions. And, we had a few candidates who asked us for positions, but, we were not in a position, unfortunately, to hire a significant number at all, maybe one or two. But where we really wished we'd done better is with students who transferred to the institution. We just didn't see a lot of them come our way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Vanessa, we probably matriculated 6 to 8 students from Iowa Wesleyan.
Okay.
And interestingly, we would have matriculated more. However, and this is part of the Iowa Wesleyan situation that made it unsustainable for them. Their financial aid awards were so over the top. They grew their enrollment by buying students at a level that is unsustainable. That when Iowa Wesleyan students came to us and said, well, here's the package that we have at Iowa Wesleyan, we just said, look, here's what we're willing to do, but we're not willing to play that race to the bottom. We're not willing to discount your tuition at 90%, for example. Other schools made a different decision, and every school has to make their own decision. We held the line. Held the line.
We did too.
Yeah, that discount rate, I mean, is one tool that I've seen so many privates sort of using, in addition to just being more transparent about the actual cost of attending college versus the sticker price that includes that doesn't include the discount. I guess I'm just wondering, like, what are some strategies, including some of those, that private colleges are using to enroll more students and recruit more students and win some of those competitions?
So Vanessa, this might be people might disagree with this comment. I think when you're basing your economic model on price as opposed to what you do that's different or distinctive, you've lost, right? The second you're making it about the price, and by price I mean tuition and financial aid, then every institution is the same, right? And so I will say, I mean, we have heard calls from prospective students and others to cut our tuition in half. But interestingly, we've got firm data that show that students would rather pay $40,000 and get a $20,000 scholarship than pay $20,000. And as
Yeah.
long as
Okay.
students are telling us that, we're not going to cut tuition.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think there is a point at which cutting your tuition is good, and that is your price point. Where you stand with regard to your peer institutions. If you stand out as is the most expensive school in the state, for example, and you're a small private college, you probably need to make a move on your price point. And I did that while I was at Westminster College. We were the third most. This was years and years ago, back in the early 2000s. We were, I think, the third most expensive college in the state. And I'm talking about big St. Louis and Kansas City schools. We're out in Fulton, Missouri. So we did cut our tuition by, I think it was about 20%, as I recall. But we ended up creating financial packages where the amount that students paid was essentially the same. But what it did is it got them by the sticker price. that's the strategy. But Jonathan's absolutely right. I mean, if you offer somebody and most of our students also are athletes. You know, they're student athletes. They want to continue to participate in athletics. So you bring some young man in and say, here's your financial package, and we're going to give you $1,000 because you're a football player. And he goes over to Jonathan's school and he says, here's a $10,000 football scholarship. I mean, somehow that rings true, even though the cost difference is negligible. So it's that, you know, he's absolutely right. You need to give yourself room to give out large amounts of financial aid to some students who provide a lot of value to your college. But on the other hand, I mean, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is your tuition revenue. And my college, and I don't know about Jonathan's, but my college is undersubscribed. So I've got about 200 more spaces at my college that I could fill without hiring any more faculty, building any more dorms, or doing anything to the facilities. It would basically, so you're essentially filling empty seats on an airplane. It's the same strategy. I do start out with a tuition discount rate that is reasonable. But the real goal, and of course the tuition, I mean the discount rate on the tuition, but the real goal is your financial gain, your revenue, which comes from tuition, fees, room and board. And there's a point at which a new student, because of the combination of tuition, room and board, and fees, will put you in a better financial situation, even though you've moved your discount rate in the wrong direction. So It's a balancing act. You know, I won't say that I'm ignoring it, but there's a point in the admission cycle where I've got to say, okay, this guy needs another $1,000. I'll get this student. And you know, that's going to be a net of $16,000 to the institution. And it's going to cost me a 1/10 of a point on my discount rate. I'm going to take the student. So there's no silver bullet, and there's no, you know, one-way strategy on this. You've got to be smart and realize what your actual situation is. But I think that setting a low tuition might get you some publicity and some maybe a jolt for a year or so, but then you're going to have to live with the consequences, and it's not pretty. It's not pretty.
And I think that's what at least the case studies show. There's a little lift for a year or two, and then you go right back down to the same economic model that you had before the tuition reset,
or worse.
Yeah. Or worse.
Yeah.
Right.
If I can jump in, we wrote something about that pretty recently about tuition resets. One of my colleagues here. Essentially, it seems like research doesn't indicate big enrollment increases after a tuition reset. So the data that we have doesn't suggest this is a big gain, but I do think it can be useful for consumers because it eliminates some sticker shock and some price confusion. And there is research that shows families will eliminate colleges from consideration over cost. So I think it's a very mixed bag, but generally I appreciate changes that make life easier for the consumer, which I think this does to some degree.
Well, and that's why you try to have a very clear projection of your financial cost to your students and their parents. And it starts with how you market your college and publicize your college through your website and through other means. And you also, I think all of us have a calculation, a college fee calculation on our websites that students, faculty, or students and their parents can go to. But the most important thing is that we tell the truth and don't have any surprises for our students and their parents when they arrive.
Now, Josh, I do have a question, and I don't really know the answer to this. Colleges make awards based on need-based aid and merit. now it's probably not even feasible, but what would happen if across the country we were unable to make merit-based awards? Like colleges and universities could only make need-based awards based on demonstrated financial need. Would we end up having more students going to college if we spread the money out along need-based rather than merit-based aid? Does that make sense?
That's a hypothetical I don't think I have a good answer for. I could see it. It's some colleges are priced high enough that the need-based aid still wouldn't perhaps help every family depending on their income level. So I just don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, and I was just gonna, earlier you mentioned athletes, and I was just have to say that I was surprised. Iowa Wesleyan's enrollment really did spike in recent years. It bounced up quite a bit, and I was surprised to see the huge percentage of their student enrollment that were athletes at the time that they closed. And I know that that had been sort of one strategy, like you said, to recruit athletes, but they were providing scholarships. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, what other strategies or sort of unique things do you think people are trying nationally to sort of recruit or to get to bolster their student body, whether they're working or not?
I can address that a little bit. I think looking at today's students and the ones that we want at our small private colleges, they're not just bookworms. They want to be involved in something else. And the most popular activity is athletics, but there are things like music, art, debate, and so forth, where a student will come to your school and want to be a major in, if you've got a good academic program, will major in biology or whatever, but they'll come to your school because you have a really great band or something like that, or something that they want to participate in. If you don't have that, you're not gonna attract a certain number of students. My nephew is 6'7", about 280 pounds, and he goes to the University of Alabama. But he's in the band. He plays the tuba. That's what he does. And he's had the $1 Million Band. He's had an absolutely spectacular experience, and he's studying engineering. If they didn't have a $1 Million Band at University of Alabama, he'd be someplace else. I had a really good experience at a small college that lives in the shadow of the University of Alabama. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a historically Black college. They built their school on the choir, but they weren't music majors. They were just kids who were really, really good singers. And with that, they were able to have a sustainable enrollment picture. And so it isn't always athletics, but in my mind, you've got to look for things that students are interested in and attract them to their school, attract them to your school through that opportunity, as well as having a good academic program. I mean, I can sit here and argue with Jonathan about who's got the best biology program. Oh God, we've got a cadaver. Oh yeah, but we've got this. It's not. The students aren't going to really discern much difference there, but they'll go because they feel an attachment somehow, and because and they've got an activity that they're comfortable in, and so it's athletics, but it's also other stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of actual like boots on the ground, you kind of mentioned this, but like when students are coming and touring the campuses, what are they looking for? Like, what questions are they asking? What are you all doing, like, in terms of like when we're looking at high school seniors, of like luring them in, or like what are you all doing to get non-traditional students? So those that are working adults. I mean, is that the pool of students that we start pulling from more and more?
Well, we're a traditional 18 to 22-year-old population as a residential liberal arts college. Do we have some who are older than 22? Definitely, but very few. I know that there are three things that students look for when they're looking at a college. At least this is what I think the data show, which is they want to go to a school that cares about their well-being and their health. Two, they want to go to a school that not just says they care about diversity, but lives it right alongside them. And three, they want to go to a school where they graduate with low to no debt. I think increasingly schools are looking at students are looking at schools and saying, and I need to know that you're financially going to make it. That would be the fourth one. Mm-hmm. Right. But I think to President Lampkin's earlier point, I think when students come on campuses, they want to know that they're going to have a holistic college experience.
Yeah, they want it all.
Right.
I will say that I had the opportunity to interview the 12 best students in the about a 300,000 population near Parkersburg, West Virginia, to see, and we interviewed them to find out what school they wanted to go to, and because they all had full scholarships, and some of them, MIT, Harvard, Boston College, and then there's this one really sharp young man who wanted to major in biology, and I asked him, "What school do you want to go to?" And he said, "West Virginia Wesleyan." And I said, and I was stunned, of all the choices that he made. And it goes back to Jonathan's point. He visited the campus. He felt comfortable. He talked to the biology professor that was going to supervise his program. And at the end of the day, the biology professor gave him a fist bump. Yeah. And that sealed the deal. So there are things that students are looking for that attach them, that they feel attached to the institution. And when kids come on our campus, we try to show them the truth and give them a reason to feel comfortable and attached to our campus. It's a safe, secure environment. You've got to be able to project that. But there also needs to be a kind of a social comfort that they feel. You would think that the big selling point is when you finish your education here, you're going to have a great career. But I don't think 18-year-olds are as interested in that as their parents are. They just want to feel comfortable and feel safe and feel like they're going to have a good time as a college student, get a good education.
Do you remember during COVID, we had, not at Cornell, but nationwide, students who were suing colleges they wanted their tuition back? And what was interesting was they were getting all their classes, but what they weren't getting was the rest of the college experience. And it was interesting because that basically revealed the monetary value that students place on the whole college experience.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It was interesting during that time because everybody was wondering if this is the new normal, like this new virtual, like, do we even need campuses? Like there were questions circulating at that time. But like you say, I think it became pretty clear pretty quickly that like, no, that's not the new normal.
I've looked at this post-COVID generation of students that's coming to our campuses now. It's been a couple of years and they've had their masks off, and they've gotten back into socializing as students want to do. And I was very impressed. I felt things are getting back to what they should be, because these students are not, they're not shy. Let me just put it that way. We had a ceremony where the faculty lined up in one side of the gym, and we had each of our new first year students come in, and they got a tassel that was they were supposed to keep and use when they graduated 4 years later on their caps, kind of a little ceremony. So there was an interaction between each one of those students and that faculty member that took place. And I was watching from behind the faculty, and every one of those students, every one of them looked that faculty member in the eye, smiled, shook the hand. It was a real social interaction going on there. And I've also noticed this particular class we've got in right now is much more active socially, in a good way, than the last couple of years. So I think we're pulling out of the COVID years, but there's still a different bunch. And we need to realize that they want to socialize, but they probably missed out on some of the skills they should have developed if they had not been restricted to the degree that they were.
Yeah.
Vanessa, before we get too far away from the question about recruiting more adult learners, I wanted to speak to that. I was at a college president's dinner in New York recently, and a question about the demographics cliff came up. And one president reacted with, "What demographics cliff? Yes, we're having less students, graduate in the coming years, but there's such a large population of adult learners out there to recruit from. Some college, no degree, that population. And colleges that are geared towards the 18 to 22-year-old traditional population oftentimes haven't heavily recruited from that population and aren't always set up very well to serve that population. They may not have robust online offerings. They may not have adequate night classes. They may not have the services those students need in the hours that they need them. So I think there is a population that is in part untapped because of how a lot of small colleges are structured.
But
right.
we're trying to tap into that, and as you look at the literature, it'll say that that's the only growing population of students. That's a place where we can do better. And as we've looked at our numbers and the way that we've managed our graduate programs, the answer is yes. But going back to one of Jonathan's points, those graduate students are not looking for the same experience that an undergraduate student is looking for. They want the degree, and they want it as cheaply as they can get it and as conveniently as they can get it. And now you're competing with the University of New Hampshire, and some of the big schools that basically specialize in this area. And any state institution can provide that graduate education a lot less expensively than I can at a small private college. So the price competition is difficult, and particularly when you consider the fact that we don't have that campus experience that undergraduate students want doesn't really affect a graduate student. They want to be able to work from home. They want to perhaps have a hybrid class, but most of the time they want to be able to work on their own schedule, and they want it to have as little impact on their budget as possible, and they want to be able to complete it quickly, and they want to have an advanced degree that allows them to advance within their profession. I mean, all of that's true, and we have some programs that are designed to do that at the graduate level, but it's not something that we can base our survival or our income on. That's almost auxiliary income for us. Our wheelhouse is undergraduate resident students.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that what we were just talking about so many students really wanting the full campus experience doesn't necessarily pertain to non-traditional students.
Right.
But I did want to ask region. I mean, when we're talking about the communities within all of these within these colleges sit, I guess I'm wondering, is it different for those that are in urban communities versus those in rural communities? Because so many of Iowa's small colleges are in rural towns, not all of them, of course. But does that have any implication on what students are choosing and where they're going? I mean, is it easier for those in urban communities or not?
Well, I've been at both. I've been in a very rural environment, Fulton, Missouri. I've been at Dominican University in San Rafael, California, which is about as urban as you can get. One of the things I will tell you is that if you're in a big city environment, you can find adjunct professors, you can find a lot of supplementary instructors that can give you a lot of diversity in the instruction that you can provide. In terms of the students that you attract, I wouldn't say, and maybe Jonathan will supplement this. The advantage of being in a small town, a smaller town, a rural community, is that safe, secure environment.
Mm-hmm.
The disadvantage of being in a very urban environment like Chicago is that it's not as safe, it's not as secure. On the other hand, there's a lot more excitement and activity going on. So, you know, which is better? I can't tell. Other than this, I prefer the rural environment.
So Josh, I'm going to guess that you may have like evidence on this. I have like gut instinct. I mean, I do think that students want to go someplace that's vibrant and active. And whether that's on campus or around campus, that's what they do want. I mean, no doubt being in a rural setting has its benefits that are different from the benefits of being in an urban setting. And we share those benefits. We celebrate them, our differences. I do think that schools that are in very remote locations where the population is dwindling will have a harder time in the future if they don't have a financial foundation to support them. I do. I mean, again, you would think I might say this only because I'm at Cornell College. I will say we're very fortunate to be in a rural setting, but to be in the corridor between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, right? I mean, for me, that's the best of all possible worlds. We have access to the urban, and we have the quaintness and historic and you know, more idyllic setting of a small college community. I think other schools that are very far from urban locations in the rural setting, if they don't have an active community around them, I think it will. I mean, again, one thing that we haven't talked about is that we have fewer students, this demographic cliff coming. We also have more students of color. The numbers are changing in terms of the student, the makeup demographically in terms of ethnicity and race. And so part of what I think through is what will students of a more diverse background want when they come to a school.
Yeah, how do you make them? How do you make them feel included?
Yeah.
And that includes not just the school, the campus environment, but also the city environment. I mean, you got to work with your community leaders to provide an environment where our students of color feel comfortable. And
yeah,
there's not a lot of diversity in some of our Iowa cities.
right, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess it also again makes me wonder about just, philanthropy and endowment, because when we talk about demographics changing, and we've already talked about this about socioeconomic shifts too, where there are more low income students coming up. I mean, is it just going to be that the ones with the biggest endowments and the biggest donors are the ones that survive, or what do you guys see on that front?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is yes. I really do. I mean, I'll give one example. So our operating budget is probably $40 to $42 million. On top of that, we're running a financial aid operation. Our financial aid budget is $35 million. That would be comparable to a $700 million endowment.
Yeah.
Right, with a 5% spend rate. So I do think that the schools that have large endowments and low debt loads and motivated alumni and friends, they may struggle with how they're delivering their educational experience, but they go to bed at night knowing that they're going to be around.
Right.
Right, and every college has a kind of a roller coaster ride during the year on the income that comes in or the revenue that comes in, because you have periods where people are paying tuition, other periods where they're not, and so you've got to have a cash flow situation where you can get through those dips, and sometimes you end up having to take out a line of credit to get through those dips. At a large, well-endowed, not a large, but at least at a well-endowed college, you don't have that problem. You worry about that stuff. So what I have had, unfortunately, have not had an experience at a very well-endowed college, and so I've always had to struggle. It's almost a daily, what the heck are we going to? It's not really a desperation thing, but boy, you better watch it carefully so that you don't find yourself in a heap of trouble. Well, let me just talk about some of the issues. If you're a well-endowed college and you have issues with your say your dorms need renovation, you need to change the HVAC system in your dorm. And it's a $2 million prospect. What are you going to do? Well, you can probably find a way to use some of your endowed funds to fund that project. Use some of your unrestricted funds and get the board to approve that expenditure. If you're not that well endowed, what are you going to do? You can't defer the maintenance any longer. You're going to have to raise that money. And if you're really stupid, you'll borrow it. Because if you borrow that money, then you've got to pay back the loan on something that that's deferred maintenance. So, the struggle for a college that is not with a big endowment is to sustain. Part of the struggle is to sustain its infrastructure, and the only way you can do it safely, unless you're operating as a big surplus, which I don't think any of us are, is to use donations, is to go out on a capital campaign and say we need to build a new air conditioner for this.
Yeah, and I just we have a question and we're coming up on time a little bit, so I wanted to throw it to you guys. One person asked if the town and gown issue is better in small towns or in larger communities, larger cities.
My experience is
going to say, no, go ahead, Professor Lampkin.
It's closer. Everybody knows everybody, and it's usually, my experience has been very good. Relationships, town and gown. Typically, the president of college will be involved in committees, the development committees and things within the community. And the smaller the town, the more significant that presence is. So, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you can make the case that everyone is wrapped up in the same everyone's wrapped up in the same mission together. I mean, so Cornell's been around for 170 years. In the 1870s and 1880s, 70% of all households in Mount Vernon, Iowa, had a Cornell student living with them.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it's just so you get that link, those linkages, those connections that really it's easier to get alignment and to get to achieve a shared set of goals together.
Yeah. And we are almost done, but I did want to throw one more question out to you all, because we've talked so much about students and the issue of attracting and retaining students. But I guess I'm wondering if there are similar challenges on the faculty and staff level. Are you guys, are small colleges facing challenges there?
Well, I don't know about Jonathan, but my faculty's underpaid. They don't make enough money. You got somebody with a PhD whose salary is less than $75,000, maybe even less than that. I think that's not good. And how do you retain faculty when you can't compensate them to the degree they need to be? That's your most important asset. And you have faculty that'll stay with you just because they're so passionate and dedicated to the institution. But you also have a bunch of them that leave. We probably have about 10 a year who will leave for a better opportunity. He'll go to Jonathan's college, where he's rich.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's another piece to this, not just our faculty and staff, and I want to shout out to staff also. Underpaid, not across the board, but in many instances, and overworked. I mean, post-COVID, the needs of our students has changed dramatically. And when you are a student-focused institution, and that's like every school I've ever known, I mean, that's what we do. One of our biggest jobs, frankly, is to protect the faculty and staff from themselves. They will work themselves to the bone to help our students. And that actually, I think, is really unsustainable for faculty and staff.
Another thing that faculty will do is continue to create new courses, and they won't eliminate old courses. So you end up with as a student. I was looking at one of our programs. They had the actual structure of the major was perfect, but then there were electives, and they had to pick, and they were all related to the discipline. But they had to pick 7 electives over the course of 4 years. They had 20 choices, so that's 13 chances to make a mistake, and it's also distributing faculty over an additional 13 courses. And that means more preps, fewer students in the classroom, and who did it? They did it to themselves because the administration let them do it. And as I try to turn that around, it's very difficult because you can justify every one of those courses for its value, but what you can't justify the courses is their necessity for the degree program. So that's a tough nut to crack, but it's an example of how faculty will work themselves, will overwork themselves, do it to themselves.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this, President Brand, but the shifting needs of students. I mean, there is still the demand to provide all these services, and I wanted to ask a little bit about the mental health issue because I know that that's been something that so many campuses are facing. I mean, is that something that you all are having to address in addition to trying to give them a good experience and stuff, but providing more resources in that area?
Huge,
Absolutely.
huge. I mean, we have 3.5 3 full-time and a half mental health counselors on campus. And it's one of those needs where we will never fully meet the need. Plus, for example, a student success center that works with students. I mean, students define mental health more broadly than maybe the mental health community might, right? And so our students are seeking help across the entire college, right? And some you have to figure out how to work with students who are like in crisis versus other students who might be on the precipice of a crisis versus others who need interventions around anxiety and feeling overwhelmed by the work. I mean, so I think it is front and center for our students, and I don't know of a school that I mean, every school that the president that I've spoken to, that this is a major focal point for the institutions they serve. I don't see an end in sight at the moment, right? And again, we want our students to succeed, and part of success is actually being mentally well, is having that balance.
You have to take a holistic approach, and we're dealing with issues now that we didn't have to think about 20 years ago, and we're having to meet student needs on a broad spectrum of possibilities, and it's costly, but it's also necessary.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There is one good thing, silver lining in all of this, which is when I was growing up, needing a therapist, for example, was stigmatizing. Students today are really quite comfortable recognizing and stating that they would benefit from help, from talking to somebody. That's a huge shift that I think is really important. But I can tell you, with the number of students that we have with diagnosed learning disabilities, and whether they were always there but not recognized, I don't know. But the number has gone up for sure.
Yeah.
I think this also ties into the last question about staffing challenges. From what I am hearing from colleges across the country, they're having a difficult time recruiting and retaining people who work in their mental health services. And being in rural areas, I would be curious to hear both of your experiences with this.
I'll agree with you, Josh. It's difficult to recruit. What we try to do is coordinate with the health agencies in our region and get some help there. But trying to attract somebody with that type of skill to come to a small environment where the pay is not particularly good, it's not easy. It's not easy. And they do very important work. We do have a social work department where we teach that particular discipline. And those professors get involved in a lot of activities on campus that support our students, but they can't do it all. You need staff support as well.
Josh, I will say, and this is where being close to Cedar Rapids and Iowa City is a huge plus for us. I mean, we have, as I said, we have 3 full-time and then a half. They're awesome. Like, we are so lucky. They are awesome. And we had 2 last year and awesome therapists, counselors. And because they were so great, they were able to attract a 3rd person who's like, yeah, I want to be a part of this group. So will it always be like this? I don't know. But boy, we're very fortunate. And I had mentioned, I mean, we're on the block system, which is to say students take 1 class at a time for 18 days. It is academically rich and rigorous. And so the mental health piece is, I mean, students are writing, I mean, they're reading War and Peace in a matter of a couple days. So they've got to be that, you know, one example. So having really the services support for our students is even more critical for us.
Yeah, it does. The discussion about partnering with community providers does seem like a tool that more and more are using, not just in the mental health space, but for lots of different services and needs. That there just has to be more collaboration, even across the campuses and colleges. So I guess that might be the last question we throw out there. Is that kind of the future, that there's going to be more collaboration and partnerships across colleges to survive?
I think academic partnerships have a lot of potential. For example, at a school like ours, how many Russian linguists are we going to have? Probably 1 or 2 that are interested. But if you go across the state of Iowa, or even with the Catholic colleges, you could probably find enough to form at least 1 cohort that would study Russian language. So and that's just one example of the technique where you have a discipline that you can engage in with a collaboration, an academic collaboration, that you otherwise could not possibly do. And it makes it a better experience for the students, as well as a money saver for the colleges. So academic collaboration can work. There's been talk of mergers. Usually when you put a struggling small college together with another struggling small college, both boats will sink. So that's not a good solution. But there are cases where the combination of 2 or more colleges is a stronger solution. But just because you think that's a good idea, it may not be. You better really look at it carefully.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go ahead, Jonathan. I didn't want too much time.
No, nothing for me. I think that makes a lot of. I mean, I concur.
If I could just quickly add, I see and have been writing a lot more about shared services models and consortiums where colleges are coming together to, compile things like IT and share those services, negotiate purchase agreements together, writing a story about colleges in Pennsylvania, exploring a consortium right now. You can read it early next week if you want. So I think from what I hear, we'll probably see more of that coming.
Yeah.
Josh, when you write your story, look really carefully at the bottom line. How much did they really save when you look at all the costs put together? And my experience with combined IT is that we had our own. We ended up hiring people on our own campus because the consortium wasn't meeting all the specific needs of our students and our people, and it was doubtful whether the time and energy and expense of the consortium was actually worth the benefit that we gained. So it's not an automatic. Let me just put it that way. You better look at it carefully to see what the bottom line comes out to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I feel like we could just keep chatting about this because it is such a deep and important topic. So thanks everybody too for listening in. And the next higher education track session is coming up here in a few minutes. It's on meeting the needs of students, and it starts at 11:15 a.m. Central Time. So thanks again for attending. Thanks to our panelists, and yeah,